What if the monsters weren't hiding in the shadows, but marching under the banner of God? What if faith wasn't salvation, but a cage? Welcome to The Devils, a story where saints bleed, monsters lead, and every line of scripture hides a lie. Today, we're not just reviewing a book. We're peeling back the veil on a world where power wears a halo and redemption tastes like ash. Prepare yourself, because this isn't fantasy as you know it. This is Joe Abercrombie at his darkest, sharpest, and most unforgettable. When silence is no longer sacred, even saints must scream. Brother Diaz was content to be forgotten. Tucked away in a monastery buried in snow and prayer, he spent his days among books, relics, and silence. The world beyond the walls could rot for all he cared. His faith had long become discipline, not devotion. Then came the letter. Sealed with black wax and the insignia of the Holy See, it summoned him not to serve, but to command, specifically a squad of blasphemers bound by divine law to the church's will. They called it the Chapel of Holy Expediency. But it was no chapel. It was a death march with liturgy. The faithful rarely recognize the face of their own God until it's snarling at them. The recruits were a gallery of heresy. Kazzan, the vampire who bled out prayers. Mallow, a werewolf with scripture carved into his arms. Hessa, the flame-born who wept when she didn't burn. And young Quina, the necromancer child with dead eyes and a stitched mouth. Diaz, now father captain, clung to what little control he had. He tried leading with sermons and penance. At night, he prayed the mission would fail so he could return to obscurity. Yet they obeyed him, not out of faith, but because something in his eyes terrified them more than damnation. They were tasked to escort a petty thief named Alex across the empire. He was no warrior, no sorcerer, and barely literate, but rumors said he carried the blood of kings. Enough blood, perhaps, to ignite civil war and crown him ruler of Troy. A man becomes a leader only when those behind him start running faster. At first, Alex was just a mouth with legs, mocking, thieving, and indifferent to his supposed destiny. He clashed with Diaz constantly, poking holes in every doctrine he'd ever believed. He didn't want to be king. He didn't even believe in kings. And Diaz saw in him a kind of unholy clarity. The journey began with storms and ended in blood. Every city they passed, Black Mass, Wordholm, Skellspire, left them more frayed. The world they traveled wasn't ruled by saints or sinners, but by opportunists wearing both masks. In the slums of Redhold, they saved a dying girl possessed by a wailing demon. Kazzan, who hadn't fed in days, gave the girl his own blood and nearly died. The others watched in silence as a vampire acted more human than them all. Diaz began to question the scriptures, not just their meaning, but their authorship. History is written by those with the loudest knives. The deeper into the empire they went, the more Diaz uncovered. Alex's birth was no accident. The church had erased entire bloodlines to keep his existence quiet. He wasn't a mistake. He was a contingency plan. Meanwhile, Alex found himself changed by the so-called monsters. He taught Quina how to play dice. He shared wine with Hessa until she smiled for the first time in years. The line between jailer and prisoner blurred. Diaz, whose sermons once dripped with judgment, now found his voice shaking in doubt. At the Citadel of Greenthrone, the group was ambushed by inquisitors sent by the cardinal himself. The battle was swift and brutal. Quina raised the fallen to protect the living. Diaz watched her summon the dead like puppets and wondered whether God had ever been in control. To serve heaven is noble. To serve truth is fatal. They reached the broken gates of Troy to find the city in flames. A rebellion had already begun, spurred by whispers of a forgotten heir. Alex, reluctant and angry, stood before the people. He spoke no grand speech, just, "If you want a king, I'll be worse than the last." The crowd roared. In private, Diaz begged him not to take the throne, not out of fear, but because Diaz had seen the cost. He no longer believed in divine right, but Alex didn't want the throne. He wanted to burn it. And so they did. You cannot destroy a system unless you know its name and then say it aloud. What followed was not a coronation. It was an exorcism. The chapel turned on the church. Kazzan drained bishops in the high court. Mallow tore down altars brick by brick. Hessa turned holy relics into ash. Quina opened crypts and called forth centuries of betrayal. Diaz, once the holy man, stood in the heart of it all. He finally saw that the church hadn't chosen him because of faith, but because he was expendable. He was a smokescreen for a divine massacre. In the Temple of Light, Diaz killed the cardinal with his own rosary. He recited scripture as the man bled out, every word bitter with irony. In the end, it was not about thrones, gods, or monsters. It was about freedom. They left Troy not as victors, not as rulers, but as survivors. The chapel disbanded. Hessa vanished into the deserts. Kazzan wandered into sunlight. Mallow built a sanctuary for orphans. Quina disappeared, leaving behind flowers where corpses once lay. And Alex? He left the crown on the steps of a burnt cathedral and walked into the wind. Brother Diaz, now faithless but free, wrote down their journey, not as scripture, not as warning, but as truth. He titled it, The Devils. Chapter 1. Faith is not found in churches. It is tested in corridors where monsters wait. Brother Diaz wakes in the monastery of St. Worm with cold fingers and colder dreams. A life of silence, cataloging heretical texts and scrubbing the sins from ancient tomes, suited him. He had made peace with obscurity. Then the letter arrives, sealed in obsidian wax, stamped with the ecclesiastical serpent. He is to lead a mission, not to preach, but to command the condemned. Diaz tries to reject the summons, citing his vows and lack of military training. The bishop merely smiles. You're not leading soldiers, you're shepherding devils. Chapter 2. You do not meet monsters in nightmares. You meet them in prisons guarded by saints. At the oubliette beneath the holy keep, Diaz meets his chapel. Kazzan, a vampire in chains who speaks Latin better than any priest. Hessa, born of fire, who dreams of setting heaven alight. Mallow, a lycanthrope tortured into obedience, his body covered in glyphs. Quina, no older than 13, and already a necromancer of terrifying precision. Each has a past redacted from holy history. Diaz tries to assert authority with holy verses. Kazzan mocks him. Hessa yawns. Mallow simply growls. Then Quina nods once. That's all it takes. The others obey her, not Diaz. Chapter 3. The holy carry crosses. The cursed carry coffins. The wise carry both. The journey begins on foot, a ragged column marching through villages that either recoil or throw stones. Their mission, to escort a thief, Alex, across the crumbling empire to the city of Troy. Alex is no ordinary criminal. He has blood ties to the last legitimate royal house, long thought extinguished. The church wants to quietly crown him if the political tides shift. Diaz thinks the boy arrogant, ill-mannered, and unsalvageable. Then he watches Alex steal food from a bishop and give it to a dying child without blinking. Chapter 4. Some chains bind your hands, others bind your conscience. They pass through the war-torn village of Iced. Soldiers press gang civilians. The chapel intervenes. Diaz tries negotiation. A blade is drawn. Mallow dismembers the lead soldier before the second syllable of surrender. Hessa incinerates 3 others in a single breath. Diaz panics, shouting prayers. Then Alex grabs the last surviving soldier and demands, "Who ordered this?" The answer, the church. Diaz realizes their path is not only treacherous, it's been laid with traps by the very authority they serve. Chapter 5. The worst kind of loyalty is the one you offer to liars. In the black market city of Gallows Rest, they hide in a cathedral-turned-tavern. Alex uncovers documents proving that the church has funded both sides of the Civil War for decades. Diaz confronts his superiors via encoded missives. The reply? You were not sent to crown Alex. You were sent to judge him. The chapel watches Diaz unravel. They do not comfort him. Then Quina, the quietest of them, simply sits beside him and places a dead moth in his palm. Even broken wings remember flight, she says. Chapter 6. Every throne is built from skulls. Some just polish the bones better. They reach the outskirts of Troy. The city burns with the smoke of rebellion. Rumors of a returning heir grow louder. The cardinal sends assassins to intercept them. The ambush is brutal. Kazzan nearly dies protecting Diaz. Hessa takes a spear to the stomach and keeps fighting. Alex saves a baby in the crossfire and loses part of his hand. Diaz realizes that Alex has already become a leader, not by title but by sacrifice. Revelation is not divine. It is the moment when you stop lying to yourself. Diaz reads ancient scrolls hidden in Troy's burned libraries. He learns the church orchestrated the deaths of Alex's entire bloodline. Alex's survival was not miracle. It was oversight. Worse, the Chapel of Holy Expediency was created not as salvation, but as a death sentence. They were to escort Alex to Troy and then kill him. Quietly. Diaz gathers the chapel and tells them everything. Then he asks, "Will you die for this empire?" No one speaks. Then Kazzan says, "No, but I'll kill for you." Chapter 8. Every rebellion begins with a whisper. The scream comes later. The chapel arrives in Troy under false banners. The city, fractured and starving, boils with civil unrest. Royalist sympathizers flood the streets with whispers of Alex's return. Diaz tries to remain in the shadows, but fate doesn't wait for permission. The rebels want Alex to take the throne. The church's army prepares to kill him before he can. The chapel votes. Do they run, hide, or fight? Alex chooses to speak, not to crown himself, but to denounce the church. "If I wear a crown, it's with blood on it," he says to the crowd. "Let's make it our blood, not theirs." Chapter 9. There is no holy war, only war with better marketing. The battle for Troy begins at midnight. The city's rebels, led by Alex in the chapel, clash with the knights absolvent. Diaz fights like a prophet possessed, his sermons turning into war cries. Hessa engulfs siege towers in flame. Mallow howls through alleyways soaked in gore. Quina raises an entire graveyard to overwhelm the enemy's left flank. Then the church unleashes its final weapon, an archangel bound in flesh and scripture, a divine abomination they call the Seraphim Engine. Diaz recognizes it instantly. It was once a man of faith, his mentor. Chapter 10. The divine wears many masks. The worst is the one that looks like justice. The Seraphim Engine tears through friend and foe alike. Kazzan challenges it and is impaled. Hessa, weeping flames, sacrifices herself to break its spine. Mallow distracts it long enough for Quina to deliver a necromantic poison that dissolves its soul. The battle ends at dawn. The city is quiet. Alex is covered in ash. He finds Diaz praying, blood on his robes, teeth shattered. Diaz tells him, "You don't need a throne. You need to be remembered by the ones who bled for you." Alex nods. Then let them write their own story. Chapter 11. What comes after vengeance is never peace, it's silence. Troy rebuilds. The people look to Alex, but he refuses the crown. He sets fire to the royal seal and steps aside. "The next ruler will be chosen by the people," he says. "Let's try heresy for once." Diaz is offered a high seat on the new council. He refuses. Instead, he collects the chapel's scattered relics: Hessa's burned ring, Mallow's glyph-covered dagger, Kazzan's journal. Quina is simply gone, leaving behind lilies that never die. Diaz writes it all down, not as scripture, but as witness. The truth, the horror, the humanity. Chapter 12. Legends are written in ink. Redemption is written in scars. Years later, in a small coastal village, a blind man preaches to no one. He wears a tattered clerical robe, speaks in riddles, and tells stories of monsters who saved the world. Some call him mad, others call him a liar. He calls himself Diaz, and when asked if the devils ever found salvation, he only says, "They never wanted heaven, just a place where they could breathe without chains." He smiles, then disappears with the tide. The Devils doesn't finish with fanfare. It dissolves, like blood in rain, like memory from an old soldier's tongue. The story fades not because it fails to climax, but because climax is not the point. The point is what's left behind. Abercrombie has always written worlds where swords speak louder than laws. But here, the blades cut deeper, not through flesh, but faith, obedience, and the very myth of justice. This isn't the bloody grit of the first law. It's colder, quieter, stranger. He writes Diaz not as a fallen man, but a man who realizes he was never standing on solid ground to begin with. His transformation isn't loud. It happens in looks, in silences, in prayers that go unanswered and still get whispered anyway. Alex, too, is not your fantasy heir. He never embraces destiny. He dodges it, kicks it, mocks it, and finally lets it burn. He becomes something rarer than a king, a mirror. He reflects every failure of the world and demands it look at itself. And the chapel, those so-called monsters, they are Abercrombie's cruelest joke and deepest mercy. They were supposed to be disposable tools. They become the soul of the story, not because they win, but because they matter, even when broken, even when feared, even when abandoned by the gods. They choose each other. The Devils doesn't ask if good can defeat evil. It asks if there was ever such a line in the first place. It whispers that institutions will always rewrite sin as necessity, that heroes are only named after the screams have stopped, and that monsters sometimes just want to be heard. You may close the final page and feel nothing. Then, days later, the voice of a quiet necromancer might echo in your thoughts. Even broken wings remember flight. And you'll understand why this isn't just another grimdark tale. It's an exorcism of power, of silence, of the stories we tell ourselves to survive. If this story haunted you, if it stayed like ash under your skin, then join me. Subscribe, and let's keep dragging truth out from the shadows, one book at a time. Click that bell. Not for me, for the devils who deserve to be remembered.